Hey crew, it's Bit, and I'm back with some more Socrates. Today we're going to be diving back into the works of Plato, the particular work of Timaeus. And we're going to pick up where we left off. We left off with the description of the soul, and now we're going to be describing, or the description of creation, and now we are going to be describing in particular the creation of the body. This is probably going to be a fairly dry presentation. It is talking about some fairly interesting things. I will try to not make it monotonous, but other than that, there's not a whole lot I can add to the conversation. I am by no means an expert in biology. I know just as much as anyone else who graduated high school and maybe a little bit more. So, with that being said, let's talk about Timaeus. As for the soul, the extent to which she is mortal and the extent to which she is divine, and how, in what company, and for what reason, these two parts are housed separately. We could only ever insist that what we have asserted is true if God were to confirm it. But should we dare to assert, even at this stage, that what has been said is likely, and will prove more so on further investigation, so let that be our statement. Well, the topic that follows from these should be pursued on the same basis, this concerned: the manner in which the rest of the body came into being. It would be most appropriate to attribute its construction to reasoning of the following sort. The race of gods who framed us knew that we would show a lack of restraint with regard to food and drink, and would consume them greedily beyond due measure or necessity. So, to prevent our rapid destruction through diseases and avoid the immediate demise of the still immature race of mortals, they anticipated these problems and put in place the receptacle we call the abdomen to retain the excess food and drink. And they twisted the structure of the entrails around so inside this, so that food would not pass through so rapidly that it would immediately compel the body to need food once again, thus producing insatiable desire and rendering our entire race unphilosophic and uncultured due to gluttony, heedless of our most divine part. In relation to bone and flesh and any substances of this kind, the following account applies. The origin of all of these is the production of marrow. For while the soul is conjoined with the body, the bonds of life bound fast in marrow are the secure roots of the mortal race. And yet, the marrow itself has come into being from other materials, for the gods separated out those primary triangles that were unwarped and smooth, and best able to produce fire, water, air, and earth in a precise manner, and set each of these apart from their own kinds. And having mixed these with one another in due proportion, he devised a universal seed mixture for the entire mortal race by fashioning marrow from them. And after that, he planted therein the various kinds of soul and bound them fast. In his initial allocation, he divided the marrow immediately into shapes corresponding in number and type to the shapes that were to belong to the particular forms of soul. He molded into a complete sphere the portion of marrow that was about to receive the divine seed into itself, as if it were plowed land. And this he called the brain, implying that the head was going to become the container for the brain once the construction of each living creature had been completed. Furthermore, he divided the portion of marrow that was to retain the remaining part of the soul, the mortal part, into shapes that were both round and elongated at the same time, and yet he referred to them all as marrow. He also cast out fetters of the entire soul from these, as if they were being thrown from anchors, and then fashioned all of this body of ours around the marrow. He had constructed a complete covering of bone to surround it. Now, to me, this is talking about the creation of the skeleton, right? The marrow, then the bone, and then the nerves attached to the bones, and then the flesh. It's an interesting process because it could have just as easily went either way, right? If you're in those times and you're studying biology to a complicated level, which obviously they were, then your best guess would have had to go either way on that. And it's just interesting that they did get it right. And he constructed bone as follows. He sifted out earth that was pure and smooth and kneaded it, soaked it in marrow, and then placed it in fire. And after that, he plunged it into water, again into fire, and then into water once more. So, by constantly transferring it in this way from one medium to the other, it was rendered indissoluble by either of them. And making use of this, he turned the sphere of bone around the brain of the creature and left a narrow opening in the sphere. He also molded vertebrae out of bone to surround the marrow that runs through the neck and down the spine, arranging them vertically like pivots beginning from the head and running down the whole trunk. And so they preserved the entire seed by fencing it about with a stone-like enclosure, creating joints and making use of the quality of difference within these as an intermediate power, introduced for the sake of motion and flexibility. Furthermore, he recognized the tendency of the bony material to be more brittle and inflexible than it should be, prone to become inflamed and then cool down again, thus developing gangrene and bringing rapid destruction to the seed within. On account of these tendencies, he devised the sinews in the flesh, so that the sinews would bind all the limbs together and would enable the body to bend and stretch by contracting and relaxing about the pivots, while the flesh was to be a barrier against heat and a protection against cold, and against falls too, because it would yield softly and gently to objects, just like garments of felt. It also contains warm moisture within itself that breaks out in a sweat, providing a coolness of its own to the entire body by moistening it on the outside in the summer. And then again in the winter, it uses this same fire to provide a measure of defense against the onslaught of the prevailing frost that surrounds it. Bearing this in mind, he who shaped us, mixed water, fire, earth together, harmonized them, and compounded a ferment from acid and brine, which he added to the mix, thus producing soft, succulent flesh. And he compounded the sinews from a blend of bone and unfermented flesh, a single substance with quantities intermediate between the two, to which he added a yellow color. Hence the sinews acquired the quality of being tighter and tougher than flesh, but softer and more moist than bone. And the god enclosed all the bones and the marrow with these sinews, and used them to bind the bones together, and placed a covering of flesh all over them. Now, whatever bones were possessed of soul, he fenced about with the least amount of flesh, while those that had the least soul received the most flesh, and that was extremely dense. And indeed, he caused very little flesh to grow at the joining of the bones, unless reason indicated some necessity that it be there. This was to prevent flesh from acting as an impediment to the bending of the joints, and thus making the body stiff and hard to move. Furthermore, lots of dense and extremely compressed flesh would be so hard that it would make perception difficult and render the mental faculties unretentive and dull. Because of this, the thighs and shins are fully endowed with flesh, and so is the area around the hips, and the region of the upper arms and forearms. Any other unjointed parts of our body and internal bones that are deficient in intelligence due to the paucity of soul in their marrow. The parts possessing intelligence are less endowed, except when he somehow fashioned flesh just for the sake of perception itself, like the structure of the tongue. But in most cases it is as I have said. Indeed, the nature that arises from necessity and develops along with it does not in any way allow dense bone and lots of flesh to be simultaneous with keen sense perception. For if these two qualities were actually willing to occur simultaneously, it would be best of all for the structure of the head to possess them, so that the human race, bearing upon itself a fleshy, sinewy, and strong head, could attain a life twice or many times as long as the present one, and healthier too, and more free from pain. But it so happens that the artificers responsible for bringing us into existence, deliberating on whether they should produce a long lived inferior race or a short lived superior race, decided that the shorter, better life should be chosen unreservedly for everyone, in preference to the longer and inferior life. Accordingly, they covered the head completely with thin bones, but not with flesh or more sinews either, since it does not possess any joints. So, based upon all these considerations, a more readily perceptive, more intelligent, but much weaker head was placed upon the body of every person. For these reasons, the god situated the sinews at the base of the head in a circle around the neck and glued them on by means of uniformity. And to these he attached the extremities of the jaw. Under the structure of the face, the rest of the sinews he distributed along all of the limbs, connecting them together joint by joint. And indeed, those who brought order to the features of our mouth arranged it as it is now, fitting it with teeth, a tongue, and lips, for the sake of all that is necessary and all that is most exalted, thus deviating an inward passage with a view to the necessary, and an outward passage with a view to the most exalted. Indeed, all that passes in, bringing nourishment to the body, is necessary, while the stream of words flowing outward in the service of understanding is the most beautiful and exalted of all streams. I like that. I like that a lot. All that passes in, bringing nourishment to the body, is necessary, while the stream of words flowing outward in the service of understanding is the most beautiful and exalted of all streams. Do you not understand that it's not the things that you consume which poison you, but the things which come from your heart? And I love it. I love it. Completely separated by time and distance. I love it. Furthermore, due to the excesses of the various seasons, it was not possible to leave the head only as bare bone, or, on the other hand, to let it become dull and unperceptive, because it was overborne by a mass of flesh. So, from the fleshy material that was not dried up, an excessively loose film was separated out, which we now refer to as skin. Because of the moisture around the brain, this skin combined within itself and grew in a circle and completely enveloped the head. And then the moisture emerging from the sutures watered it and closed it in at the crown, drawing it all together in a kind of a knot, and the structure of these sutures became variegated due to the effects of the inner orbits and of the nutriment. And the greater the conflict between the two orbits, the more sutures there were, and the lesser the conflict, the fewer the sutures. Now, the divine part pierced this skin all around, and once it had been perforated, any pure moisture and pure heat in the liquid that emerged from it evaporated, while the mixed substance that was the skin too was made from rose up on account of the movement and stretched out at some length. It was fine as the tiny piercings, yet because it was slow moving, it was pushed back under the skin, again by the external air that surrounded it, coiled around itself and took root. So the hair grew on the skin due to these processes, kindred thereto because it was fibrous, yet harder and more dense due to the solidification that derived from the cooling process, which cooled and compressed each hair as it separated from the skin. With this, our Maker made the head woolly by making use of the factors we have described, intending that hair, rather than flesh, should cover the area around the brain to ensure its safety, still providing sufficient shade in summer and shelter in winter without becoming an impediment that would prevent proper perception. And from the combination of sinew, skin, and bone, dried out to form a single substance from all three, a hard skin developed, twined around the end of the fingers. And although it was produced by these three subsidiary causes, it was wrought nevertheless by an ultimate unintentional cause with a view to subsequent generations. For those who framed us knew that at some stage women and other beasts would arise from men, and they also understood that many of the animals would require the use of claws or talons for numerous purposes. Therefore, as soon as humans came into existence, they gave them traces of the structure of claws. So, based on this reasoning and with these motives, they caused skin, hair, and nails to grow at the extremities of the limb. And once all the parts and limbs of the mortal creature had developed into a natural unity, and it proved necessary for such creatures to spend their lives exposed to wind and fire, be wasted and depleted by these, and perish as a result, the gods devised a means of helping them. By mixing various characteristics and kinds of awareness, they brought about the development of a nature akin to human nature, a living being of a different sort. These are the domesticated trees, plants and seeds that have been trained by husbandry into the cultivated forms that we possess. Before that, there were only the uncultivated forms, which are older than our cultivated varieties. Indeed, anything that partakes of life may justifiably be described as a living being in the proper sense. Yet, the kind we are speaking of now partakes of the third form of soul, the form that our account situated between the midriff and the navel, the form that has no involvement with opinion, intellect, or reason, but only with sensations that are pleasant and painful, and their accompanying desires. For it is always completely passive, and its origin has not given it the natural ability to reflect upon and discern any aspects of itself by turning inward, being concerned with itself, shunning external motion, and having recourse with its own motion. So it is alive, and although it is a living creature, it is stationary, rooted to the spot, and struck because it is bereft of motion on its own. Now here's where I get to interject one of my own theories, right? Because I do have one. I do have a theory that is somewhat similar to evolution in the nature. It is the evolution of the soul is what I call it. And I think that we all start off in the first degree of life. And the first degree of life is simply being elements. And then in the second stage of life, we group together into mass. And in the third stage of life, we group together into life, right? We become something that feeds and grows at the third stage of life, which is the same as what I'm taking from here. That is the existence stage of life. That is the plant in particular, because they have length and width and height, but they can't go in distance at all, and they have zero concept of time. Whereas the fourth stage of life, you have movement. That is the creatures that crawl and fly and move. They are in the fourth stage of life. They have the heart, the motivation to go forth. They can move forward in space, but they really still don't have the concept of time. They don't have the concept, as far as we know, like squirrels and their instincts to hoard for the winter. Those things are instinctual. That seems to be that level. But we operate in the fifth, because we have the concept of time, but we have no mastery of it. Right? We can't go back in time and change anything. We can't go forward in time and change anything. But we know about time. We can plan ahead. We can do things because we are in the fifth stage. And then in the sixth stage, which I believe is soon to come, there's a dividing line, right? And in the sixth stage, we have the control of time, not to change it, but to see it, so that you can go forth in command of seeing forward and backwards and understanding more than the current understanding. And then from there you proceed into the creation of time, right? And that is well down the road for this current incarnation of souls. I believe that we start as souls as each of those, and we are the best element we can possibly be. And then we're the best little chunk of element that we can possibly be. And then we're the best tree or the best blade of grass. And then we get incorporated into the whole of the animals. And then we become the best animal that we could possibly be. And from there, we strive to become the best people that we can possibly be. And when it goes forward from there, we can only speculate on. But that is, in short, my theory on the reincarnation. I don't believe that all souls were born male, human. I don't believe that. I believe that we are here for the experience of the growth, and that souls in some manner have been here since the existence of time was a thing. Even before we had the concept of time, we still did what we were supposed to do. And some souls may still be in the mountains, right? Or some of these sequoias that have been around a really long time. They're learning some really good tree lessons. And that, is short, is where I stand on it. It's here in the middle of this, and it's in the middle of several other things. And one day, I'll talk about it in its own video, maybe. I think I have, actually. I think it is in the playlist somewhere. Now, once the superior beings had caused all these varieties to grow as nutriment for us lesser creatures, they made conduits through the body itself, as though they were cutting channels in gardens, so that it would be watered by a sort of incoming stream. In the first place, seeing that the body has a twofold structure with a left and right side, they cut two veins along the back to act as channels hidden beneath the conjunction of the skin with the flesh, the spinal column. They also brought these down along the spine, enclosing the reproductive marrow between them, so that this would flourish to the greatest extent possible, and so that the influx of liquid that flowed so easily from there, because of the downward course, would provide uniform irrigation to the other regions. Then, having split apart the veins around the head, they intertwined them and sent them in opposite directions, so that the left were bent to the right side of the body, and those on the right to the left. This, along with the skin, was to act as a bond between the head and the body, since there were no sinews at all around the crown of the head. What's more, it would also enable the sense impressions coming from either of the two sides to be fully evident to the entire body. At that stage, they facilitated the transport of liquid in the manner that we shall now describe, heart. But it would be easier to see this once we have first come to an agreement on the following point. Anything composed of smaller particles repels the larger particles, while those that composed of larger particles are unable to repel the smaller particles. Fire consists of the smallest particles of them all, so it passes through water and earth, air, and anything composed of these, and nothing is able to repel it. Well, we should bear in mind the same principle in mind in relation to our own abdomen. It retains any food or drink that falls into it, yet it is unable to retain air or fire because these consist of particles that are smaller than its own structure. Therefore, the God made use of air and fire for the distribution of moisture from the abdomen to the veins by weaving a mesh like a fish trap, having two ducts at its entrance, one of which he proceeded to weave once more into a forked structure. Then he extended cords of some sort from the ducts into a circle throughout the entire mesh as far as the extremities. He constructed everything within the mesh from fire, and the ducts and the vessels from air. And then he took the structure and positioned it around the creature he had fashioned in some manner as follows. He let the part consisting of funnels down into the mouth, and since it had a twofold structure, he lowered one part into the lungs by way of the windpipe, and the other alongside the windpipe into the abdomen. He divided the first of these in two, and gave each part alike an entrance to the channels of the nose, so that when the other channel through the mouth was not working, all of its streams would be filled up from this one. He caused the rest of the vessel that constitutes the fish trap to grow around the hollow part of the body and made it all flow together gently into the ducts, since these were made of air. And in alteration with this process, he made the ducts flow back out again. So, because the body is porous, the mesh sinks into it and emerges once more, while the rays of fire bound fast within follow both movements of the air, and this process does not cease as long as the mortal creature holds together. And we say the name giver has called it inhalation and exhalation. And indeed, the overall process and its effects acts as a source of nourishment and life to our bodies by irrigating and cooling them. For whenever the breath passes in or out, and the inner fire connected to it follows along, as it continually moves back and forth, it passes into the abdomen, seizes upon the food and drink, and dissolves them, dividing them into tiny particles, and draws them through the passages in the same direction it is proceeding, pours them into the veins like water going from a spring into channels, and sets the currents of the vein flowing through the body as if they were flowing through a pipe. That's not far wrong, right? But we should look again at the process of respiration and the reason why this occurs as it now does. It is as follows. Since there is no void into which any moving body would be able to enter, yet the breath does come out of our body, one's consequence is surely evident to everyone. It does not emerge into a void, but displaces whatever is adjacent from its position. But whatever is displaced continually drives out whatever is adjacent to itself, and on the basis of this cycle of necessity, everything is driven around again to the position from which the breath emerged, enters in, and fills it. Because there is no void, this all happens at the same time, like the revolving of a reel. Because once the chest and lungs exhale the breath, they are filled up once more by the air surrounding the body, which is driven around, and it sinks in because the flesh is so soft. And then again, when the air is turned around in the other direction, it is coming out of the body, it pushes the breath around and inwards by the way of the passage of the mouth and the nostrils. We should presume that the initial cause of these processes is as follows. In every living creature, the warmest parts of its internal parts are situated close to the blood and the veins, which are like a fountain of fire residing within. This, of course, we liken to the mesh of the fish trap, extending through the middle thereof and woven entirely from fire, while everything outside of that was made of air. Now, we must accept that heat naturally proceeds outwards to its own region and towards its kindred. But there are two ways out, one emerging by way of the body and the other by way of the mouth and the nostrils. So, whenever it rushes one way, it pushes the air around the other way, and when this is pushed around and falls into the fire, it is warmed. And when it travels outwards, it is cooled. But now when the heat is changing its location, and the air currents preceded by the one of the exits becomes warmer, the warm air tends to go back by the way of the exit once more and travel towards its own kind and pushing the air, using the other exit, and driving it around. The same effect and the same response keeps recurring, thus setting up a cycle that oscillates back and forth and brings about inhalation and exhalation. What's more, we should look to this principle for the causes associated with the effects of medical cupping instruments, the causes of swallowing, and the behavior of projectiles that are discharged into the air, and those that travel along the ground. Also, any sounds that are rapid or slow, and therefore appear sharp or dull, sometimes discordant in their movement due to the lack of uniformity of the motion they produce in us, sometimes cordant due to the uniformity. Indeed, the slower motions overtake the more rapid motions that precede them, and the rapid motions are coming to a halt and have already attained uniformity with those which the slower motions impart to them when they arrive later. And as the slower overtake the quicker, they do not impose another motion and cause disturbance. Rather, they initiate a slower motion, based upon the faster motion which is dying away, introducing uniformity and blending together a single experience consisting of sharpness and dullness. Consequently, they provide some pleasure to the unintelligent but delight to the intelligent, and due to the imitation of divine harmony arising amidst the movement of mortal beings. And consider in particular all the flowings of water, the descent of thunderbolts, and the wondrous drawing of power of amber and lodestones. Lodestones are magnetic rocks. But I am unfamiliar with the drawing power of amber, and I'm going to have to look that up. Unless amber has a different meaning than the one I knew, I don't know of any magnetic properties of amber. I'm definitely going to have to look that up. In none of these cases is there any attractive force. Rather, it will be evident to anyone who investigates them methodically that there is no void, that these entities push themselves around into one another, and while they are all being divided up and combined together, each changes its position and moves towards its own region. And by interweaving these processes with one another, we get these wonderful phenomena. As for the effect of respiration, from which our account digressed, this has arisen on the basis of these principles and through these processes. As the fire cuts up the food by rising up inside us, following along with the breaths, it fills up the veins from the abdomen by the rising process which floods them with the minute particles therefrom. Digestion. And so it is that the streams of nutriment have been said flowing through the whole body of every creature. The newly formed particles from kindred substances, from fruits and vegetables, which the God caused to grow for our particular benefit, to nourish us. These have taken on a variety of colors due to the commingling, yet the color red is predominant throughout, a quality brought about by the cutting effect of fire and the impression it makes on liquid. Hence, the stream flowing through the body, the one we call blood, has the color we have described. It is pasture for flesh and for the entire body, and it draws liquid from there and replenishes any place that has been depleted. The process of replenishment and depletion takes place in the same way that motion of everything in the universe takes place. A motion whereby everything is borne towards its own kindred. Of course, our external surroundings continuously cut us up and break us apart, dispatching each form towards its own kind, while the contents of the blood, for their part, having been cut up inside us into small pieces, and being surrounded by the structure of each creature as though enveloping heaven, are compelled to imitate the universal motion. So, each of the particles within the blood, being borne towards its kindred, replenishes once more the space that has been left empty. Now, whenever more is going out than is coming in, all things decay, but when less is going out, they grow. So, when the entire structure is young and the elemental triangles of its constituents are still new, like fresh wood, the bonding holding them together is strong, and yet the overall construction is soft, since it has been newly formed from marrow and nourished with milk. So, when the surrounding triangles come into it from outside, the ones that the food and drink are made from, these are older and weaker than its own triangles. So, it overpowers these older triangles with the new ones, cuts them up, and makes the creature grow large by nourishing it with an abundance of substances similar to its own. However, when the root of the triangles is slackened because of numerous such contests, fought against many opponents over a long period of time, they are no longer able to cut the entering triangles and assimilate them into themselves. On the other hand, they themselves are easily split apart by those triangles that are coming from outside. Every creature in this situation is overpowered and decays, and the condition is called old age. And in the end, Once the conjoining bonds of the triangles and the marrow endure no longer under the strain and are split apart, they in turn release the bonds of the soul. And once she is set free, in accordance with nature, she flies away with pleasure. Indeed, everything contrary to nature is painful, while anything that arises naturally is pleasant. The same goes for death. When it happens as a result of disease or injury, it is painful and violent. But when it comes with old age, an ending that accords with nature, it is the least painful of deaths, attended more by pleasure than pain. And I think that is going to be a good place to wrap this one up. I do believe that we will be finishing up Timaeus in the next reading. It'd probably be about an hour for that next part, and so we'll go ahead and cut this one a little bit shorter than normal today. There was a lot I didn't have to add to this, and hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion, right? The part that I did bring, I feel fairly confident in stating because I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. This does not mean I'm correct. I'm never meant to be thought of as being the definitive answer on anything that cannot be defined definitively. I'm merely trying to learn, to spread knowledge, and to disperse my own reading of that knowledge. I do have a little bit of wisdom. I have lived a little bit, and I don't claim to be the all-knowing, most wise, but I have learned a few tricks. Hopefully, you enjoyed this, and if you did, let me know down below. And yeah, that's about it. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me. I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.